We're joined by Alex Tabarrok today, and I'm sure you're familiar with him and you've seen his TED Talk now as well. So Alex is a professor of economics at George Mason University, and we've had him at a Foresight seminar before, and I'm always very curious to hear what he has to say on pretty much everything. So we're very happy to have him here with us today. So we thought we'd just open up the floor to any sort of questions you have. I don't know, Alex, do you want to start with maybe introducing yourself also?
No, that's not important, but I would just say, yeah, I'm fine to answer questions, but also I understand that you've been working on a institution which is changing and going to try and work out what the consequences of that are economically, politically, strategically, and so forth. So I thought maybe if you want to tell me what institution you're thinking about or what major change you're thinking about and how you've started to work out the downstream consequences of that change. And then maybe I'll just maybe be able to say something interesting, maybe not. But so what is your elevator speech? I will, like Peter is to my right, I will ask Peter to start. So how about that?
Hey, Alex. I think our groups have a variety of different approaches and different institutions that we're looking at. One of the ones that our group is looking at that I think is something that a lot of groups are considering is the role of an international institution in acting as a climate leviathan or in coordinating climate approaches. Obviously, I think that many of us believe that the current approach where some states, nation states are setting the lead and others are following or opting in or opting out isn't super effective for the sort of global scale addressing of this issue. And so our group has proposed a variety of mechanisms for addressing this, but I was curious of your thoughts of, do you think there is a global institution to address climate change, whether it's explicit or not? Do you think that there's enough cohesion to address that? And if not, what do you envision as something that might realistically occur if, say, there became a political will or a mandate from a sufficient number of people to address it? And something to consider is whether or not it would have teeth or not, or whether it would continue as in the current mechanism to be opt in or opt out. But I don't want to hijack the whole conversation. So I think if anybody has a completely different institution, if we maybe want to throw some in the chat for Alex to think about, and maybe we could do some voting or something to see which ones. I know this is just one thing that's come up in our conversations, and so I thought we'd get the conversation started.
Sure. Yeah, I think I have two things to say on that. First of all, creating these global institutions to produce public goods is very difficult. Hard enough to produce national public goods, even more difficult to produce global public goods. So what I would say would be interesting to do is to look at the few cases where we have been moderately successful in the past, the Montreal Agreement on ozone depletion, for example, and figure out like, why was that successful? Why were we able to make a deal on that? I think technology had a lot to do with it, actually was reducing the costs of making that kind of deal. But that was just like one example. There aren't very many others of, especially because at the global level, we have such widely divergent interests. We have a majority of the world being less than average per capita GDP, right? And so billions of people are saying, what are you talking about? I want to at least have a decent life, move up the Maslow hierarchy of values before we start talking about reducing climate change. I think thinking about that and thinking about ways of just making it less costly, with very rarely do we give up something which is good for altruistic reasons, right? That happens very rarely. Instead, what usually happens, what has to happen, is you have to have something which is better, right? So my view, if we look at climate change, all of the agreements in the world have been far less important than reducing the cost of solar panels. Like that has just been technologically has been much, much more successful. So thinking about not how do we get agreement, but how do we get everyone to agree, not to give up something good for altruistic reasons, but that this is in everyone's interest. Let's think about the technology side. The other thing I would just say on that is actually coming at it from quite the opposite angle. And that is one of the cheapest and most effective ways of reducing, the global climate temperature is to seed the atmosphere with sulfur dioxide and as in a volcano. And that's actually a rich billionaire could do that. So the problem there is actually that it's too easy in a certain sense and too available. And are we going to get, if some country starts doing it, or some group, there are some groups who are starting to invest in doing the science behind this, are they going to be declared outlaws, right? So it's a quite an interesting situation, one where people are usually thinking about, which is what you started with, like how to get everyone to produce this public good. The other way, which I'm talking about, is there's this almost private good way of reducing it. And, what if China doesn't like it, that we are putting stuff into the atmosphere which affects the weather in China? They're going to get upset about that. So that's another kind of a problem to deal with, and a different political problem, but a different political problem.
Mhm. Along the lines of some of those topics that you discussed, I think your comment on people wanting to move up at Maslow's hierarchy of needs before they jump to considering global problems like climate change. We're addressing in ours, and again, I think a number of groups are doing this. We're talking about structures for global proliferation of technology and global communication, democracy. Do you think that a platform that could do that sort of thing would have an impact on issues that are global, like climate change? Or do you think that if, say, cell phones, I think are the example that I was thinking of, where people are adopting cell phones before they necessarily have their Maslow's hierarchy of needs met, because it enables them to then access a global market, sell their goods more efficiently. And then, so on one hand, right, that's not following the paradigm of one step up the hierarchy of needs, and instead it's jumping towards the end. So do you think that something where, for example, we were trying to just increase global connectivity, do you think that it would have an effect on some of these other issues? Or do you think it would just maybe exacerbate some of the problems we're seeing from the global discourse on the internet right now, where it's leading to some fractionalization? Nations are using it as, some would say, weapons against each other in propaganda because everybody's on the same platform. What do you think the impact of having just a global conversation about some of these topics would be? Like a truly global, not like representatives from nations, but everybody being able to participate.
Yeah, I don't think that ever happens or will ever happen. My own university, right? We don't even have a conversation in the university. We just have a small group of ideologically fervent people who run the university. We're never going to have this global conversation. So I'm not big on conversations. What I am more big on is, look, people will do what's in their interest, obviously. So I've talked a lot in India about reducing air pollution. Now, I don't go when I'm speaking in India, I don't go and say, we have global climate change and we have to have solar and nuclear to reduce the world increasing. I don't say any of that, okay? Because that's like a white guy, me coming into India and like trying to tell them to do something on behalf of other people. So instead, what I say, which is totally true, I'm not lying about this stuff, is I say that air pollution kills lots of Indian infants, right? It stunts growth. It reduces GDP. It makes people less productive, makes it harder to work, creates all kinds of medical problems. And so that actually reducing pollution in India can increase wealth and health, or increase health and wealth at the same time. And so that kind of, I think, who knows, but I think that kind of story is much more likely to get people to listen to you and much more likely to have an effect. Now, then to make that real, to add to that, if you want to add to that, then what one should do is convince people in the developed countries, how do we make it cheaper to produce less polluting energy, right? Okay. And there, I think you could have an effect on governments, right? Whether it's an R&D tax credit or whether it's Stripe investing in, or Microsoft investing in nuclear power, or government programs or whatever. I think there's a leverage point there, right? So the leverage point is to develop technologies, which then everybody wants, to develop better technologies, which everybody wants, and then forget about the conversation, okay? If solar is cheaper, okay, than coal, then you don't have to convince people to give up a high standard of living to adopt solar. You just have to convince them, hey, you can have a high standard of living and it's less polluting. That's just the icing on the cake. So I think, yeah.
So you might be talking about something like Tesla open sourcing their electric car patents, right? Where the budget for that and the development for that is internal, but incentive based. And then once they've open sourced it, the electric cars are cheaper for others to build and produce. And that's just a pull dynamic where the individual consumer who wants the electric car is now pulling people using those available patents. And that is a more sustainable and maybe global model.
Yeah, exactly. A pull model. It could be electric cars, could be research into hydrogen, solar, geothermal. There are plenty of non-polluting sources. And look, it's not even that successful in the United States. The Jimmy Carter thing, like put on a sweater. This is before time, but but that's what he was saying, to adopt to the climate energy crisis, not the climate crisis at the time, but the energy crisis at the time. Wear a sweater while you're inside. And that's this un-American, anti-progress, anti-science. We want more energy, not less. Okay. So like my whole thing is how to have a growing civilization, not no growth. I want more growth, more economic growth. So I'm very much opposed, both philosophically, but also pragmatically, for any group which is advocating sacrifice in order to, quote, save the planet. Now, what we want to do is to create enough wealth so that, in fact, saving the planet is what we want to do, is in our interest, is cheap and is possible. And that's pro-growth, pro-energy, more GDP, higher standard of living. And then, you get, it seems paradoxical, forest land is increasing around the world, but particularly in Europe and the United States, because the greater productivity of agricultural land has meant that we need far less land than we used to produce more food. So we're producing more food on less land, and a lot of land is returning to nature. So we can, in fact, have it all. Okay. And that's the way forward, is to think in those terms.
I am just one of many group participants here. So
yes.
I want to step aside and let other people. I see a couple raised hands there.
Yeah, we have Jose. Do you want to go?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much for your text, Professor. I wanted to ask a couple of things. First of all, on one of the readings that we had for this class, I see the reasoning behind why central planning doesn't work, or has never really worked, especially up until now, when we had, at the end of the day, it was always individual human minds doing the processing, right? The economic processing of information. But what if we had an AGI that had access to a lot of sensors connected to the internet? Could we envision an efficient central planning system in that case, or would market systems still be much more efficient, even in the era of AIs? And another thing that I wanted to ask was, I also saw your TED Talk that was listed as another one of the readings. Also very interesting. Thank you for that. Very inspiring. And you were talking about all the positive trends that we have in the world today going on. And you talked about China getting wealthier, India getting wealthier, global cooperation getting more and more entrenched. But right now, it seems like we're in a little bit of a recession of global cooperation, right? So we're seeing more great power competition. We're seeing the close down of a bunch of important straits for global trade. So how do you factor that into your view of the future? Thank you.
Okay. So on the first question on sort of computers and AI and central planning, of course, people have always said, they've been saying this for a very long time. You go back and there was a kind of a famous project, what was it called? Project Synthesis or Project Consent? I forgot the exact name, in Chile. And the idea was that they were going to run the Chilean, this is in the 1970s, before the coup, and they were going to run the Chilean economy using the most advanced sensors and computers and so forth. And this was considered high tech at the time. And it totally made sense in exactly the same way that you're suggesting it made sense today. Like at the time, they thought, oh, this is incredible intelligence and these computers are amazing and they'll be able to centrally plan the economy. You go back and look, and of course, what they were trying to do was centrally plan the economy using less than an iPhone, okay, right, of computing power. It looks silly today, but at the time, it didn't seem silly at all. There was these giant machines, and they thought they were going to run the economy. Now, what is the basic answer to this? There's a lot we could say, but I think the basic answer is this, is that what will happen is not one giant AI which controls the economy. Rather, it's that there will be many AIs, okay? And each of us and each firm in the economy will have access to a variety of AIs doing kind of different things. So actually, the economy is getting more complex, not less complex. So like in the same way that if it was just the case where we have a modern AI which is trying to run a farming community from 2,000 years ago, like maybe, I don't know, maybe. But actually what's happening is that everyone is getting AI. The economy is becoming much more complex. So it's not becoming more open to centralization. Centralization, in fact, is not gaining because intelligence is increasing everywhere, and one AI cannot model 1,000 other AIs. Right? It's this again. It's still going to be a decentralized process. I think AI is not is. I think AI does not solve the central planning problem. Now, on my TED Talk, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's depressing because indeed, I argued and still think that there's so much that the world has to gain by a richer China, a richer India. The main thing in my TED Talk was arguing that this means that many more people are willing to invest in research and development. Up until 20 years ago, no one in I'm exaggerating, but I'm going to do that. No one in China was getting cancer, right? Obviously, that's false. But people in China were dying at younger ages before they had a chance to get cancer. Cancer is a disease of old age. So it's only when people live long enough to get cancer that you have 1 billion people plus in China now saying, hey, this is a problem I want to solve. Before, I was just concerned with getting enough food to eat, okay, in the 1970s. Now, we have many rich people in China, and they're concerned about many of the same problems that we in the West are concerned about, living longer, healthier lives. And so they're willing to invest much more in research and development, and that means more drugs for everyone. Once you've got the formula for a cancer-killing drug, then that is good for everybody. So to increase world spending on R&D, I think is incredibly important. And not only are on the consumer side, the demand side, do rich people spend more on R&D, but of course, the richer a country gets, the more that country can afford to spend money on scientists, on engineers and scientists. So on the supply side as well, you get a richer world is a world in which many more people are scientists and engineers. So for all of these reasons, I think there's a lot to gain. But currently, yeah, we are in a great powers clash, and trying to get over that hump, I think, is a big foreign policy question for the next generation. We in the United States have gotten used to, in the last 50 years, since the end of World War II, of being more or less in a unipolar world where the United States was clearly the leader. And we are going to have to get used to a multipolar world, in which many other countries are on a similar level of development as us. And how do we get along? How do we get along? We've solved that problem to a large extent in Europe, okay? So you had, for hundreds of years, European nations were at war with one another. Britain and France were going at it for hundreds of years. But they have managed to come to an agreement. Okay, Britain, I should have used France and Germany, not Britain, because Britain is out. So even Britain, you have Brexit. More generally, Europe has managed to come, since the end of World War II, to an agreement, a European Union. And if Europe can do it, if Europe, where there were for hundreds of years wars of terrible attacks on one another, it seems like not ending, right? Like you just look at France and England and Germany and Italy, they're just Napoleon and Hitler, they're just at war forever, right? If it can be solved in Europe, it can be solved in the world as a whole. So there's no reason why the world as a whole cannot be in a competitive state as in terms of economics and things like that, but they don't have to be at each other's throats. So that I think is the big problem that we're going to have to solve, the multipolar problem. Okay, a couple of other hands. I'm not sure who. Beatrice, are you going to be in charge?
Yeah, I'll tell Aaron to go.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I'll try to make it quick. Say we have a tool, right? An AI assistant. I can speak into it and maybe ask me about my preferences back. And we poll basically billions of people about things like, would you increase taxes by 1% if it would mean you would get that in your neighborhood, whatever it might be. Do you think that could work? Because earlier you were like not that convinced about, say, the value of dialogue, but I wonder if it's a matter of scale.
I'm totally open to experiments. Let's see if we can have a decentralized, autonomous organization run with the help of an AI. Let's see if my colleagues and I can agree where to go for lunch. Does an AI help us to solve this problem, optimize? So I'm totally in favor of experiments with various preference revelation mechanisms. I think those are interesting. Maybe AI can help us there. I don't know, but let's start small before we try and revolutionize before evidence, right? Okay, let's have a lot of little experiments before we engage in grand schemes to change how the world runs.
And Hannah, maybe it's the last question we have time for. If you have to leave at the half hour, Alex, I don't know. But Hannah, you go.
Thank you. I wanted to ask regarding inequality. Do you have any model how to communicate or how to change information flow to support more the development in communities which are now left behind and support less some kind of winner takes all dynamics, or something like your view on antitrust?
On inequality, I think the interesting thing is that inequality at the world scale has actually declined. If we go back, let's say 1950, 1960, even somewhat later into the 1980s, then there really was a developed world and a third world, an undeveloped world. And with the rise of China and now following behind India, that really has changed dramatically. China is now in not quite middle income, Mexico level income. They're probably going to top out around that level because their institutions aren't that great. But tremendous decline in inequality, if you think about that on the world level. And the same thing is happening with India. I've been, just in the time in which I've been traveling to India the last 10 years or so, it's been palpable. The decrease in abject poverty in India, and everyone in India is watching Netflix and still very poor people, but the growth rates are high. There's convergence. So there's nothing to prevent, I think, much greater equality, especially in terms of basic resources across the world, so long as we keep growth going, so long as growth continues, which is in part does rely on globalization, right? Like one of the big reasons why China was able to reduce poverty so much was that they were welcomed into the world trading, the community of trading nations, and they were able to sell huge amounts of exports.
Sorry, so do you think there's not much winner takes all competitions? Because I feel some countries didn't profit much from globalization, or at least there's some kind of pushback, and you said it in some videos as well, maybe that people want to build the walls again because they feel didn't profit it in comparison from globalization. And the problem is the perception, like they profited on the absolute level, but in comparison to other people, they profited less. So they are pushing against it. Don't you have some kind of plan or vision
Right.
for communication change, how
Right.
to prevent it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that the people who complain, perhaps rightly, I'll come back to that in a second, the most about being left behind are not the poorest people in the world. The poorest people in the world, people in India and China and other developed countries, have done extremely well. Nobody doubts this from globalization. So globalization has been a tremendous boon to the poorest people in the world. The people who have done possibly less are the poorer people in the richer countries, right? So I think it is true that a lot of support for Trump, for example, in the United States, has come from places which faced competition from places like China and India and so forth. At least they felt that was the case. Now, so I think there's something to be said for managing expectations and managing negative feedback in the richer countries, right? But we still have to keep in mind that the poor people in rich countries are rich on a global scale, and that they have the most opportunity to benefit and partake in a global dynamic economy. So, yeah, I think there is something to be said about people who are left behind, but it's a political problem. It's a problem of perceptions, and it's a problem of foreign policy more than it is of economics. Because, in fact, people in the United States, despite what you hear or which on TikTok, the younger generations are better off than the previous generations. Now, look, they could be even better off. There's lots of problems like housing policy in the United States is terrible. Okay. So we have a disastrous system where we've made it extremely expensive to build new housing. And more than anything, I think that has had a negative effect on young families, on young people, okay, who are trying to make their way in the world. So that is a policy problem. It's one which we can solve. But still, even despite these problems, younger generations are better off and will be better off than past generations. And we need to keep that in mind.
Thank you so much, Alex. I don't know if you have to go or if you have time for one final question.
Sure. I can say if people are interested, I can answer another question or two if people want.
Great. Kenza, do you want to ask your question?
I think I was next.
Oh, Kevin, you go. Sorry. Kevin's question is the last question then.
I just had a question about what Hayek would say about the education system. And sorry, I need to set up my question. Hayek really privileges, I think rightly, local knowledge, local people's own incentives instead of trying to coordinate all these through a centralized planning system. But education, I think, and the reason why the state controls the education is because, like, people's beliefs, the society's most fundamental beliefs are transmitted through education. So it almost sets like a frame for what local people's preferences should be. So if we were to try to really respect the right of local people and their incentives, what kind of education system would we need? Is there a way to, instead of it being mediated by this education system, is there an education system that really gets at the heart of the local community's own interests and their own preferences?
Right. So I'm not totally sure where you're going with this. I think it is true. It's very interesting, actually, that on a worldwide scale, like if you want to predict which countries spend a lot on education, it turns out to be highly correlated with which countries own television stations. Okay. In other words, the education is often used as a means of propaganda, just like the government owning television stations and radio stations and so forth. Why does the government do that? In order to put out propaganda. So the best kind of propaganda is when the kids are young and they don't even know it's propaganda. There's a high correlation between these things. Yeah, I would tend to support a more decentralized education system. I do like vouchers. It is remarkable to me. I'm just like blown away by how successful in the last 5 years the voucher program has been in the United States. So Milton Friedman was talking about vouchers, and even before him, John Stuart Mill was talking about vouchers. He said quite rightly, it's one thing to say that because of externality or public good or liquidity problems or whatever, that the government should fund education, but why should it produce education? That doesn't make any sense at all. It's like saying everyone needs food, therefore the government should grow the food and make the restaurants. That doesn't make any sense at all, right? You might have food stamps to help people buy food. It doesn't make any sense to say that the government should be making the food. In the same way, you might have a voucher which allows people to buy education, which they otherwise might not be able to afford, but there's no reason to have the government produce the education. That creates you just if you had government restaurants. John Stuart Mill, Milton Friedman, all the people like this, as well as people on the left as well, supported vouchers, went nowhere for decades. But then with COVID, actually, and people had so much home education, and people got a new perspective on what's going on in the schools, and they didn't always like what they saw. And actually, there's been much more polarization in the United States. So people used to agree. We all agree on the propaganda we want our schools to teach. So we had public schools. Now there's less agreement. There's one group that says we want the propaganda in government schools to teach about how great the United States is and the founding fathers, and we had a civil war to get rid of slavery. And the other group wants to say the United States is, founded in original sin, and the slaves built the country, and it's racist, and it continues to be racist. And because there's so little agreement on the propaganda that we want the government schools to teach, there's been a massive increase in the demand for vouchers. So now there's a bunch of states which have full voucher systems. So I think that's going to be huge going forward. And like I say, I'm just shocked that this has happened in my lifetime. I wasn't expecting it. And to see what's going to happen, the explosion of private education in the United States at a time when the technology is also making this much more realistic. AI is going to have a huge effect on online education. Tutors, like the AI, like everyone is going to have, from the time in which they are born, access to a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, is going to have access to Plato and Aristotle, like a tutor, right? Like an incredibly wise, knowledgeable, friendly, helpful tutor who knows everything you've been taught. He knows about your life. He knows what your concerns are. He knows what you know. And it's going to be very precisely instead of one teacher teaching 30 students, every student has an Oxfordian style tutor, and not just a great tutor, but the greatest tutor the world has ever known. A tutor who knows more than any single individual has ever or will ever know. The prospects for education, I think, are just tremendous and mind-boggling, and it's a huge opportunity. And I don't know what's going to happen, but like the Overton window has gotten really big, and education is going to be changing tremendously over the next few decades.
Thank you so much. That's, I think, a very inspiring note to end on. Yeah, thank you so much, Alex, for joining us. And looking forward to following your work in the future as well. So
great. I look forward to seeing all of the fantastic things I think are going to come out of this group. It's very exciting. And you're all
Thanks a lot for coming.
applauded.
It was really great to see you again. This was wonderful.
Good seeing
Thank
you, Allison. Okay. Thanks all.